And okay, I think we're just about ready to go. Super. Okay, great. Well, thank you guys for joining from across the world, but here in London, it is Chris and I have just been swapping stories about our very hot home offices that we're having to deal with. So I think now more than ever, Chris might be missing the office air conditioning.
Definitely am.
Although having to balance that out with getting on public transport to go into the office probably weighs out. So welcome guys to our next episode in our Expert Masterclass series, which showcase our stories of people who make change and transformation happen behind the scenes in big companies. And this week we're delighted to speak to Chris Howe, who is the Change Director for BT Consumer. So welcome, Chris.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Great to have you with us today. And you're going to talk to us all about managing change in a crisis. So we've just been swapping some stories there, but I guess it feels a bit like COVID is over, and it's clearly not. But the whirlwind of the last 2-3 months have certainly thrown some challenges your way within BT and EE that we're going to elaborate on today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so finally able to catch a break. So Chris joins us, as I said, Customer Care Change Director at BT, but your background, Chris, is actually first in the military, isn't it? And then in the Ministry of Defence.
Yeah, I spent about 20 years in operational roles, actually in military healthcare. So doing lots of building field hospitals abroad, working with sort of aid agencies and communities around the globe, but really looking at the logistics side and the command side of it, rather than the actual hands-on medical side. And then more recently, in I suppose the last 9 years, working in various roles across BT, all with an operational lens. So I've been very fortunate. I've worked in our technology side, I've worked in our OpenReach side of the business, and then more latterly in our consumer side. So yeah, that's really where I come from, is an operational and change background.
Operational and change, but you sort of straddle into the customer experience world as well, right?
I do, yeah, I do now. Very recently, I've picked up a role where I was always the recipient of change, and always had a vocal or rather a strong voice around how it should have been delivered to me. And actually, I was afforded an opportunity to move in and actually move into the design side of it, as well as the delivery. So I look end to end now across our 3 brands, so EE, BT and PlusNet. And anything that is coming into our customer service world, I have responsibility to launch. So whether that's a new product, a transformational delivery, or any of our internal change that we wish to push through, I take responsibility for that end-to-end ownership of it, and just make sure it lands not only well with our customers, but also with all of our internal staff.
That's great. We're going to go into some more of the types of projects you do, but just for the benefit of the audience, because we have people on here from all across the world, maybe you can tell us a bit more about who BT, EE and PlusNet are, and where you fit in the organisation.
Sure, forgive me, I thought we were talking to a British audience, but that's great. Great to have you all from across the world. So BT is probably the largest incumbent in the UK telecoms market, and we look after circa 30 million customers across the UK and also globally. Most of those are based in the UK, are either in our consumer business or in our enterprise business, which looks after our B2B market. And we deliver fixed line and mobile capabilities, as well as a whole raft of cloud-based services in the corporate sector to support communications. And our role really is to make people connect and communicate better in a number of different guises, regardless of what network you're on.
That's great. And we're going to go into more of your specific role and project today. I should have said thank you everyone who's joined. Please ask any questions in the chat, in the Q&A down below. We'll have time for questions as we go through, so please pop them in either the chat or the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Great. So Chris, maybe you can tell me about so you're talking about millions of customers, right? And when you say consumer customers, it's broadband in our homes. So what are some of the challenges? What are some of the problems you and your team face?
Yeah, I mean, so it's not just broadband, we look after our mobile colleagues as well. And also we have our own TV service and sports service as well, which provides content. So it's kind of a true multimedia customer base that we have. I mean, look, our challenges range across the spectrum. We will have service outages, which my guys have to lean in and deliver in a sort of true contingency fashion. Most of their work, though, is really focused around delivering new products and services and making sure we get it right from the outset. So I have a team of customer experience consultants. I have what we call design and delivery consultants who are there to build the end-to-end processes and to make sure that it's launched effectively. I also have test and trial teams, make sure that for new products, we'll take it out into alpha and beta trials and test it with our internal customers, our colleagues, and then external with live colleagues before we put it into market. And I then also have customer comms in terms of our service communications and also our knowledge management team. So holistically together, those guys bond and really create an end-to-end experience that means that we're getting stuff out the door as effectively and as efficiently as we can with the highest CX levels that we can possibly deliver. Also, then we manage any of the challenges that arise from that.
And maybe you can tell us, you're saying CX level, so I've never come across the same definition twice of what customer experience
everyone seems to have it in their job title these days as well. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably fair because everyone has a real role to define CX. For us, what my team do is right up front of a journey of any new delivery, they basically create the blueprint. So they will be talking at a high level, strategy level, what we want the experience to look like, the number of touch points, the channel strategy that we'll be looking after, how we envisage that that is going to work. That then creates a template of which the rest of the business, particularly the technical design teams, follow to build through. And then we can hold in the technical design to account when that comes into my delivery arms and make sure that actually everything that we envisage right up front in that design process comes through to fruition, and then we make sure that it's landed. Now, clearly, you know, as you go through, that can be quite a dynamic process. So we have to move and adapt and change as we identify any hurdles or specific issues. But what it does mean is that we're really clear from the outset in the CX that we want to provide, and then how that will manifest itself as it goes through.
So maybe you can give us an example of some types of projects that might bring that to life.
Yeah, sure. So I think look, one of the biggest ones we did last year was we launched 5G, which is the new mobile network. We were the first provider to launch that in the UK. Although my team weren't wholly responsible for the network design or the technology, we were responsible for how this landed with the customer and making sure that they really understood the benefits of 5G over 4G, how we positioned it, how it was going to be talked about in sales conversations, how it was going to be talked about in service conversations, really bringing it to life so that the consumer understood that this wasn't just another technical gizmo. It was actually going to be something fundamental and another variant of the network that enabled huge sort of transformational change, not only in you know, work life, but also as we'll see over this year and into next year, I think very much in our personal lives with better media platforms, better apps, all the rest of it. So they were really responsible for those processes, a slick understanding with the customer base, and then making sure that our sales team were really equipped to get it out the door.
And I guess to think of that as 5G, how do you define success in such a massive rollout, and maybe how do you keep the team even motivated and focused on that single goal in something like that?
It's really difficult to keep them very, very focused, because 5G is just one of the many programs that we deliver. But I think if I go back to original part of that question, which was how do we define success on it? I mean, clearly customer numbers is a great measure that people are willing to buy your product. At the moment, we're still striving to be the #1 provider, not only across 4G but also in the 5G space, making sure customers stay with us. So even when they take the product, that they're retaining that business. We often look at how much value we can do through cross-sell and upsell. So inevitably, you have an entry-level product like a phone that's connecting to the network. What else can we give the customer? Is it insurance? Is it a service wraparound? And we really see that that's a massive benefit. And then I think it's all around customer experience measures. So lots of companies use NPS and other similar measures to gauge how the customers feel, not only about the product, but also around the experience that they get. So I think you bring those two bits together, you've got the financial element, so how many new customers you're getting through, also the experiential element of it, and that then drives how successful we are. And we're pretty forensic actually at looking at all of the drivers that sit behind those on a weekly, if not daily basis, and make sure that we've got plans in place to kind of improve and really focus where we see those hurdles.
Okay, so a real focus on data underpinning.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Insight driven all the way.
And maybe you can tell us a bit more, as well as the customers, who are some of your main stakeholders, and how do you keep all those ducks in a row?
Yeah, so I work pretty much across the whole of our business, and we're a large corporate group. So within consumer, I clearly deal with all my marketing colleagues, the finance team, to make sure that when we're launching products, we're meeting the right business targets. Actually, a lot of my work goes on with all of our support teams that sit in the background, and that's our technology and design team. So, you know, there is no point in rolling out new products if we don't have a robust network delivering those capabilities. So we constantly work with our technical teams, hold lots of our business to account, and actually we become the advocate, if you will, for a great customer experience. And through a number of forums, we really put them on the spotlight and make sure that they are delivering stuff that is delivering the end customer experience. Also that they're not doing things like network migrations that will impact us. And we work hand in glove with them to make sure that happens. We also deal with all of our sort of marcoms teams. So anything that's going out of the door, we make sure that we're influencing the market comms, that we're guiding them on time. We're guiding them on the channels that they can that they want to drive interest into, so that we can manage the operational experience within it. And again, what we don't want to do is overburden service channels or billing channels when they're dealing with other issues, when actually we need to make sure this lands. So a lot of choreographing, I think, across everyone's work stack to make sure that we get the right time slot that is optimal for us, but also optimal for the customer.
So it sounds like you kind of play that role of the voice of the customer across a lot of internal teams as well.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe, I guess, was 5G anything in comparison to the COVID response? Did it come out of nowhere? What was the first reaction?
If you've asked me 12 months ago, I'd have said there probably wasn't anything as complex. And because we had to be first to market with 5G, that was always our aspiration as a company. We really drove hard, and we were up against some very, very tight timelines and technical capabilities. If I fast forward kind of 12 months, I think most of that pales into significance with the immediate challenge that we faced with COVID. And I think everyone, you know, across the globe has been impacted by it. So they know the real sort of dichotomy that the businesses face is keeping the lights on, keeping customers supported, whilst also really going in and protecting your staff, workforce, making sure that we had all of our capabilities stood up. So yeah, it was a significant challenge, shall we say, but I think we've come through it. We've learned a lot about it, which I know we'll unpack in a minute.
Yeah.
If I go into some more of the detail. But I think, you know, these things are often thrown in to test us, and with testing you get learning. With learning, you understand really the true caliber of an organization, and I think we've held our own on this. So we're very proud internally of the way that we've all dealt with the COVID response.
Great. So maybe you can tell us a bit about how, kind of, when was the realization this was real, this was something needed to be done? How did it even all come together before you took action?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. We're very fortunate that we've got quite a large business still out in the Far East. So actually, they almost became our eyes and ears, and certainly our Hong Kong-based business. And we've got a big office in the southern part of China as well. It was saying that there is a challenge here. And I think even when the UK government and UK PLC as a whole sort of thought this was a Far East problem, a bit like SARS was and a bit like some of the other diseases, we were cautiously watching it, but really not ramping up and making any wholesale change. And then I think as it came into mainland Europe and into Italy, we were starting to do comm planning at that point. Now, for us in a consumer business, the biggest thing that we wanted to do was to manage our customer base. As we said before, we've got about 30 million existing customers. We knew that communication in this period was going to be huge, whether that was keeping, you know, businesses alive, keeping support to the emergency services, working with the NHS, which ET Group do as a whole. But actually, we also realised quite quickly that when we started to see other countries go into lockdown, there was going to be a huge demand on our consumer businesses and our consumer networks. Many more people working from home, many more people trying to do meetings or connectivity like we are today over platforms such as Zoom. I mean, often we would sit in board meetings and there'd be one conference, platform at the end talking to another office with another 20 people in it. Now we're talking around many tens of thousands of individuals using the network. So we had to make sure that, one, we had that network resilient. And we really kind of said, well, actually, how do we protect the customers? Because we need to make sure that they are being looked after and managed effectively. So there was a lot of comms that went out, calm the customer base down to make sure, give them confidence that we had the resilience, that we weren't going to fall over, that their plans and their small business or medium-sized business plans weren't going to be put at risk because our networks can cope. So we did a lot of that to our base as well, and worked very closely with our enterprise channel. We then really said, actually, we were starting to lose some chunks of capability. And although we're very proud that we brought our our call centres back into the UK and into Ireland last year, which was all around customer experience, people wanting to talk to local people and feeling that they had a sense of understanding and belonging with those contact centres, actually enabled us to protect huge chunks of our operation. There are other competitors within our market who sadly have big centres in places like the Philippines that were just wholesale shut down, or in India, as we saw, and we were impacted to a large extent, were also shut down wholesale. So it was around maintaining those service levels whilst also giving this commitment to the customer. And that was a real challenge. We worked very closely with our partners in India, also in the Republic of Ireland, who had a different response to the UK, and actually probably a much more a deeper and more robust response in the early stages. So we had big challenges in keeping the service levels going, but we managed it. We extended shifts, we managed to drive through additional working patterns, etc., to make sure that we got there. Then quickly realised that actually protecting the workforce was a second, if not dual sort of primary target that we had to do. And for those of you who have ever been to a contact centre, there's a lot of people in a very small space often. So things like social distancing coming in posed some real challenges for us. So we had to quickly adapt, and working with all my operational colleagues, we set in place a number of processes and protocols to make sure that social distancing was key in those centres. We could keep the centres open. We also realised quite quickly that actually putting social distancing in, you lose a lot of capacity, physical capacity within the centre. So we had to move very quickly to a home working solution. Now, this basically meant ripping up our routing and our IT infrastructure, taking it from these sort of hard armoured cabled networks that sit and support our sites, and getting it into a cloud solution to get out into the people's houses. Now, it wasn't actually too bad. We've got a lot of capabilities across BT Group that enabled us to do that. I think the sheer volume of getting 8,000 people tested, their home networks tested, their home office space approved to work with things like card payment systems, and to make sure that we protected customer data, and then physically getting these people home in a controlled yet efficient manner was a huge undertaking and task. And my team are really responsible for doing all the logistics behind it, making sure we did all the comm planning, making sure we put all the mitigations in place. So we go through all of that. We've looked after our existing base. We've then kind of done a lot of work to protect our workforce. And we realised there were still some people who had to be in the office. We still have some call centres that provide 24-hour capability, for example, around the mobile network, where it was just either too complex from a hardware perspective to get people home, and or actually we found that lots of people wanted to come to the office. They didn't necessarily have the right working environment at home. So we put in place things like feeding our teams, making sure that they had the right welfare wrap, making sure that they had the right support whilst they were on the site. And then we kind of paused for a bit and we said, right, we've done a really good job in here. What else can we now look to do? And actually, we realised quite quickly that there was a lot of organisations that were very dependent on us as we were going through this. Someone had tipped us off that the NHS, for example, were using their personal phones in a way that we never even envisaged. So they were using them to allow patients to respond and talk home to their families. So we quickly looked at this and said, actually, how can an organisation of our size help? how can we bring all of our capabilities to bear? So we really looked at two things. One, we just said, let's give the NHS staff, regardless of who they are, if they're a customer of ours, huge discounts, unlimited data, unlimited minutes. So it was allowing them to have that connectivity in a different way, that they weren't worrying about the financial side of it. We then also looked, and we got a number of handsets, tablet devices, and we equipped them with SIMs so that we could donate them into the NHS, so that the wards who were impacted by COVID actually had mechanisms and tools to talk home and to make sure that people were connected. And then as it started to emerge and go through, we started to identify that people like the Department for Education were actually crying out for help in reaching out to disadvantaged kids, people who didn't have connectivity or access to the broader networks to enable teaching or education, or all of the things that many of us take for granted. So we then set up a program to really look at how do we get and again, jointly with Department for Education, how do we get Wi-Fi access to these people? How do we get them connected onto the network? How do we do basic IT training with them that's remote so that they can stand up? So again, we launched a big package of work that kind of looked after those. And finally, one of our colleagues came in, and as an organisation, we're passionate about delivering back into communities that we operate, serve, and work within. And one of them said, do you realise that there's lots of people in care homes who aren't getting any visits at the moment? Loneliness is a big challenge anyway within this population. So actually what we started off as a voluntary scheme across all of our staff, but has now grown arms and legs and are much more fundamental, was we're now getting our contact centre staff, getting them to call people in care homes and do nothing apart from talk and have no agenda, but to make sure that they are getting interaction with the outside world. Now, we tried this on Zoom. Many of those people in care homes just weren't able or capable, or was too alien to them. So we went back to the old phone system that they were pretty comfortable with. But that's working really well, and it means that we've got something like 20 care homes up and down the country that are in our scheme. We're now contacting out. So if I go back and respond to some of those bits, I think COVID was a huge challenge. But every time we sort of fixed one problem, another problem emerged, or we identified that there was a need that only someone the size of BT could potentially support with. So it just developed and developed. And I think actually, as we've gone through it, not only have we learned lots about ourselves, about our leadership styles, around the way that we had to respond to it, but we've also learned that actually we, as an organisation, we need to be much more supportive of the national infrastructure and wider organisations. And I think if another crisis or challenge of this scale comes around again, we'll be much better placed to deal with it and respond and support people.
That's great, and it's fascinating. I mean, it's hard to believe it's only 100 days or so, 3 months that you've been looking at this, for the amount that's been achieved in such a short amount of time. And actually, the point you've just said there at the end is quite close to. We have a question here from Martina, who says, now you've been through this response, what have you learned that you will put in place going forward for your disaster recovery processes? So I don't know if they'll change, or how will you take all these learnings forward?
I think it's less around disaster recovery, actually. I think we've learned so much as an organisation in terms of the way that we lead and manage it. And I think any big organisation runs a risk that it become bureaucratic and hierarchical. And actually what we realised is, in terms of crisis where you need fast and speedy decision making, that just doesn't work. So we've moved much to a model of, we used to call it in the military actually mission command. It's where you empower people deliver within their own remit. And whereas before we would go through a number of checks and balances to approve things, to make sure it's signed off, we needed decisions made in minutes, and we just had to kind of guide the team, give the teams the right resources, give the teams the right direction and focus, allow decisions to be made very much at the tactical level, because they were doing it for the right rationale and the right reason. We've also, I think, learned that getting it perfect first time in a crisis doesn't matter. Actually, getting about 80% of it or 70% of it out the door in the moment is much more important. So you've got a response, you then develop it and build it in life. And I think we're going to take a lot of that into the way that we do products. We don't have to go wholesale national market at one go. We can launch things in a much more agile fashion. And I think then it's also around really giving our teams the belief And I think it's, although we often all say it, was there a bit of lip service paid to it, and did a crisis, was a crisis needed to really bring it to life? And I think, those are the bits we're going to take forward. The crisis management, the disaster management side of it, to me, comes down to process. Actually, all of this came down to leadership, and we have the right leadership in place with the right resources and the empowerment to deliver those. That's the bit that I think we'll take away and make sure that is built into our structures going forward.
So on the leadership, that's really interesting. So you're saying, as well as this like mission control to empower the teams themselves, what did you find out about yourself and your style of leadership in this?
Yeah, look, I've been fortunate. Been in the military. I've been in some very difficult and challenging situations in the past. But I think you learn lots about yourself in any environment. For me, it was around proving what I thought actually could be true in a business environment as well. I think, me and my team we got applauded for the way that we lent in, the way that we prioritized effectively, the way that we managed to keep a cool, calm focus on things. I think they were the bits that I would take away. I think managing stakeholders is probably one of the key learnings I've got out of this, that lots of people operate in different speeds in a crisis. And have a different lens on it. And I think understanding where their concerns and challenges are, and spending more time on a human level working with them rather than on a sort of policy or a director level, actually helped us be much more efficient much quickly. So I spent my life picking the phone up to senior stakeholders, doing engagement with people to make sure that they understood the rationale as to why we were doing things, which then kept the heat off the teams to actually go and deliver and drive it through. And I think you always question yourself, I think, in a bit of a crisis, and I think there's a lot of learnings that we've all taken, my team have taken, we've reflected on it, around actually having confidence and believing in yourself and believing in the structure and process you've got in place. Takes you immense way. So I think the positivity is the learning that we've taken out of it. Absolutely stuff to learn from and change. But I think it's that belief and the confidence that we can go and tackle bigger and better things now. And if we can do this in a crisis, why can't we do this when we can plan it, right?
Not that I'm sure you'll be inviting this on anytime again soon, but yeah, so I was going to say, if there's what's going to happen next? Are you going to go back and reverse any of the decisions you made? What does the new normal look like? What happens next?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. What does the new normal look like? Does anyone know, I think, is the answer. I think we're very mindful that although the government is moving at a certain pace, we have to listen to the scientific evidence. We have to be prepared for a second wave. We do not have complete confidence that this is the end of it, and I think you'd be naive to do so. So lots of the stuff that we've done, like getting people home, getting them set up in the home environments, will absolutely remain. Now that brings challenges in itself, but we're working around those. And I think even when restrictions start to loosen, we probably won't go back to the pre-COVID days immediately. We will have, offices may open, we may do types of meetings in there, but actually I think the large majority of our people will remain in the home environments and work from there. Actually, it's pretty effective at the moment. I think in some of the things that we've done, so some of the emergency responses, we have to unwind, really because they were temporary. They were there to define it, and like the deep sort of discounts we've given to the NHS. Clearly, we would love to keep those going, but from a commercial perspective and the size of the NHS, that's not going to be supported sort of too long term, although we will absolutely look at all of those. And then I think it's really around how do we take things that were temporary, make them much more strategic. As I said before, getting something out the door with sort of 70% ready is much better than being 100% too late. We've got to now go and close that gap, and we've got to make sure that those bits where there are risks that we had to take in the heat of the moment, that we're kind of closing them off. And then I think longer term, it's opened up a number of challenges for us. We were a heavy contact center organization with lots of people in building. We've got to now get our thinking and strategy caps on and start to say, is that the workplace of the future? Do we need as many people in building? So, where there's many things that it's kind of we've resolved, new problems and challenges emerge. And I think, it's going to be an exciting time, because technology, we know, is going to be at the center of a lot of this. We're in a great position with our capabilities to deliver it. But who knows what the future brings. I think we've got to think long and carefully around where we will be in a year's time, in terms of some of those challenges. So looking forward to it. It's going to keep me in work for the next 12 months at least.
Why do I get the feeling you're in your element? This is
I am. I love it. I love a bit of that. Yeah.
Great. We have a question here from Victoria. Fantastic discussion. With so many people now based at home, how has this influenced the way in which your leaders lead and your team stay connected and engaged?
Yeah, I mean, great question. We're very fortunate that we had a number of tools in the business that are there around collaboration. And actually, one of the great ones that we launched quite close to COVID kicking off was we took on Facebook's Workplace, which is a great sort of community tool to build and drive engagement. So we've been using things like that to make sure that colleagues feel really connected. We've got quite a young population. So there is God knows how many TikTok videos floating around on that at the moment with people doing crazy stuff, which is great because it shows, you know, the vibrancy of the organization. I think specifically though, if you kind of put it at a manager level, we've had to do a lot of work, not only in terms of equipping them with the tools, so making sure that they understand that video conferencing is absolutely critical. Seeing people's body reactions when you're talking and body language is absolutely critical in these environments. We're almost coaching them to manage and coach in a virtual world, which many of them haven't had to do. They do it in a face-to-face world. So we've put a lot of effort and training into that. But actually our bigger challenge is how do we keep people upskilled? And although there's lots of brilliant platforms and tools, if you think as an organization of our size, we've got constant changes going in, even if that's pricing plans or product or variants of product coming through. We constantly have to train, you know, a 14,000 workforce on all of these changes. Trying to do that in a virtual way and make sure that it lands, make sure that it embeds, and make sure that you can do it in a really time efficient manner is probably one of our bigger challenges. So we're doing lots of stuff at the moment in terms of how do we use sort of gamification to support us in that? How do we use lots of kind of robotic learning to help us, and loads of digital stuff? I think there's bigger challenges. There's got to be a cultural mindset shift in your leaders to understand that they've got to operate slightly differently in a virtual world. And I think that means you have to spend more time with your team individually, in groups and one-to-one. You need to explain things more. You need to make sure that people feel that they've got the support, even if that's in a virtual setting. So whether that's on like a WhatsApp chat or on any of the contact platforms. And I think you also just have to be mindful that you've got lots of people who are often dealing with difficult or vulnerable customers. They're now isolated and don't have an opportunity to vent or to talk to people or to express. So we've had to kind of put much more pastoral type wrap around our teams as well, which has been difficult. I don't think we've got it wholly right, if I'm honest, at the moment. I think we're still learning a lot. There's lots of great work that's gone into to deliver that. And I think it'll probably take us another 4 or 5 months to really get that true organizational learning and then go, actually, we made some mistakes, we need to change and develop. But we're very much doing our best. We're very much leaning in and learning how to lead on it. But I think it is a challenge.
It's great. Thanks, Chris. And if there's any other suggestions for that kind of pastoral care at home, it would be great to put them in the chat. I know the client I'm working with at the moment, they have fireside chats with their CEO once a week, and they've also introduced like yoga sessions. They've been assigned into groups. I think they've to do 100 miles in June. So kind of lots of things that help to make people feel connected, which are totally outside the day job. But colleagues there have fed back to me, they just really appreciate that they feel looked after and valued by their employer at a time that's really difficult and uncertain for so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been on, I don't know how many pub quizzes. I think technology helps us, but it doesn't replace face-to-face human contact, and that's how we just have to manage in this new world.
Yeah. That's great. We have another question here from Colin. Since 2016, the shareholders report starts to talk about NPS and reports data for incremental NPS improvements since then. So up 39% group wide. Do you know why reporting started and what started the improvement since 2016?
Sorry, was that BT Group's NPS, was it?
I'm presuming this is BT Group NPS. That's been asked, Colin. You might confirm on the chat.
I mean, I think if I kind of take the question, I think the question was, why was our NPS, basically, what was our plan to drive NPS forward? How have we managed it? How have we done it? And I think, look, it's been a long journey. Helen, you remember when you were there, that it was a challenge, and we were very aware of some of the customer experience problems that we had, and we had to overcome them. There isn't one thing that drives NPS. There's no magic bullet. It is consistent focus and drive at every level across the organization. I think one thing that is absolutely needed and is key is making sure that the exec team buy into it and drive it as one of their key success and outcome measures. Because if you don't have an exec team that are bought in, that sort of pervades through the organization. We're very fortunate that we've invested a lot in our underlying technology platforms that created a number of our customer experience problems. We've invested a lot in how we deliver. And I think it's also having a customer first mindset that's been really driven in. And one of the bigger challenges, again, going back to culture, was getting people to really believe and understand that the customer was first above everything, above P&L, above our people, above everything. You had to put them on that pedestal. Now, not to say that those things aren't important in a corporate setting, but you've just got to get the balance right and make sure that the drivers are there. And then what we do is, I said before, I'm very fortunate that in one of my parts of my role, we hold the rest of the business to account. And actually working with my transformation colleague who has kind of unpicked and unpacked where all of our problems lie across the business. Together, we've been able to go in and really challenge and tackle and make sure that we've got the right programs in place. That we're consistently looking at where those drivers of NPS are and making sure that we've got a plan to improve them in some way. And it's never resting on your laurels. I mean, EE was great when it came across to BT and we merged. So those of you international, EE was a large private mobile network. It was a combination of T-Mobile and Orange. And then it was bought by BT and we brought them in-house. And a very different culture, a very different organization, gave us lots of learning. Actually, they were very high in their NPS. And actually, when we'd gone in and spoken to them, we realized that they'd gone on a 5-year journey as well to get it to where they needed it to be. But we took lots of lessons that have been learned the hard way, and we managed to accelerate those quite quickly and bring it through. But, to go back to Colin's question, I think it's making sure that you've got buy-in right from the top. It's making sure that we've got an organization that is leaning towards customer experience in every department, and everyone takes it as a real responsibility for drive and closure. And then it's making sure that you've got the right governance focus and resources to then tackle those problems when they arise and to make sure you're not doing it. And then, from my perspective, make sure we design stuff from the outset. It doesn't create a problem or has a risk of creating a problem. So it's eliminating it at all. Hopefully that kind of answers the question. I think, there's a broad remit BT and NPS. So
Yeah, and Collins asked a follow-up question saying, how was the executive team brought on board and what shifted to help them drive NPS? And I guess just on what you're saying, I left in 2015. I worked for BT for 5 to 6 years. And definitely when I started in 2010, BT was not, customer first was alien concept, I would say. And it was definitely not top of mind for execs. By the time I left in 2015, there was a chief customer officer, and I think BT were one of the first FTSE 100 companies to put a chief customer officer in place, Lisa Harrington, who helped to drive improvements across the board. But I think that you've gone on much further than that in the last 5 years to become much more of a mindset and cultural shift across the organization. So is there a single answer even for how to get the exec on board, or is this more of a movement?
I mean, I think is it chicken and egg? Was it the exec that drove it, or was the environment that drove the exec to change? I'm not sure. I mean, I think we've got very customer focused executives, certainly in our consumer business, and you sit in the board meetings, and I'm privileged to go on our board a number of times a week, and actually, the first thing that comes out is this right for the customer? There's an ethical component. Are we doing the right thing? Then we get into, can we afford it? Then we get into, is it going to deliver a sustainable profit for us? And sustainability is a key thing as well, because we've really changed our mindset for a long-term vision to make sure that we're delivering it. And look, we haven't got everything right. We're a large organization. We're very much midway through a journey. We've made some great improvements, but we've still got a long way to go. But I think you've got the whole of the organization pulling in that direction. It just makes everything so much easier.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Thanks, Colin. Going back, Colin says, thank you, appreciate answering it and the follow-up. Going back to COVID, we have a question from Claire. I recently heard the phrase, there is much to be learned in times of crisis for times of plenty. So what have BT learned from their COVID-19 response that they'll bring to future ways of working to be more innovative or competitive?
I think I'll answer that in a way that's innovative. I think we've done some quite clever things, I think, over the last couple of years in terms of developing the technology. I think what the crisis has done, though, is forced us to look at, are we tackling the problem through the right lens? You know, we've got great products, great solutions, but are we actually employing them in the right way? And I think we have to look at how we respond in a different manner. And what I'll expand on this is, if you look now, something like COVID forced us to wake up and realize that there were lots of consumers who were at home who didn't have the right level of connectivity. But also, Britain has an aging population, and there's lots of people who would normally spend lots of their week looking after or managing elderly relatives or friends, and they couldn't do this. So actually, we've started to look at how can things like technology really help us in that space. How can we make sure that, you know, all of the great innovations we've got, in-home cameras, sensors, communication tools like Zoom, you know, we can bring to bear and make sure that we can provide that level of support to people and make them think differently. And I think also, you know, the lessons that we've learned, and I kind of talked a little bit about this before, but the lessons that we've learned in managing our workforce, you know, how can we just become much more flexible as an employer to make sure that we can get people to work in different environments? And one great example is we, you know, between ourselves and Sky and Amazon, all the three providers sort of have most of the the British football content, or rather English football content. And often those games are in the evening where we get lots of peak demand coming in. And if you've got people based in offices, that means you have to have difficult and complex shifts. But, you know, can we look and say, actually, our working practices can be much more innovative now? Can we get people at home to work for 2 hours just over, you know, the precursor to the game, so they meet demands or spikes in demand? Can we get people to work at home more on a weekend, for example, you know, or on bank holidays, and provide the support in different ways? So I think it's enabled us to open up and not be innovative in terms of, you know, go out and design new products, but use our existing capabilities in an innovative way that means that we can be much more flexible and much more dynamic in the market, and also support our people in a better way as well.
It's great. Thank you, Chris. So I guess just a step back before we finish up, you have kind of landed in customer experience, as you said at the start of the interview, but from this, like, I mean, to move from the army through to dealing with this response, like I said, your perfect job, right? But maybe you can give some advice or guidance to people on this call who want to build a career. You know, what advice would you give to someone who is in your shoes, leading this kind of response on behalf of an organization this size, and how might they think about moving into this field if they were interested?
Yeah, I think, although I never really realized it at the time, I think having a breadth of experience, not necessarily mean depth, but a breadth of experience, has really been beneficial. And as I said before, working in very large different organizations such as the Army, working with very complex stakeholders, both in an international setting and in a local setting. I think when I came to BT, also having a breadth of responsibilities that led from technology teams to managing site surveyors who would go and work in the building industry, for example, make sure when we're building new housing plots that we would have the right network connected, to working in frontline customer experience team. I think being able to draw on all of that experience has been super valuable for me. It means that when you go in and talk in a broader business context, you can actually bring some real tangible evidence and benefits to bear. And I never realized it until I was in this role. So looking back, I would say that that's an area. I don't think you need to be an expert in it, though. I think it's around becoming a generalist, and it's around understanding how you can use those experiences to become a better leader. And I think leading people is understanding the strategy, being very attuned to your teams, and then understanding, you know, the challenges that they face to be able to help them. I think specifically around customer experience, when I worked with you, actually, Helen, we were on the wrong end of customer experience, and I was managing Ofcom complaints, and we were dealing, you know, frequently with the worst side or the bad side of CX when it goes wrong. And I think that also really helped me understand where lots of the problems were. I think by understanding where the problems are, you can then go forward and start to fix them and really shape and design. And I think a lot of my role is not having the answers. It's around challenging and influencing people to get them to think differently so they come up with the answers. And I think that experience and that background has really helped me to do it, but also really contextualize it and put it into a way that people really understand and is human and is simple and, you know, is identifiable. So that's my lessons. I think it's always really difficult, you know, to say when someone asks you, what's your roots? That's my learnings, and I'll stop there, I think, before I go any deeper.
Yeah, I think the planned career path is something that's a bit of a myth. It's, well, I ended up here, so I took all of these, but whether someone else will replicate the same steps. So no, that's great. Thanks very much, Chris. And just really if there's any final questions for Chris, please let us know. I was going to ask about that. How do you stay inspired, stay creative, stay up to date on trends? Any recommended resources that you would recommend to this group, to this audience?
I read a lot. You know, there's many sort of journals, articles out there. I think just get in. I still actually, I was very fortunate. I did an MBA a number of years ago, and I still have access to all of their library digitally, so you can delve in and pick stuff up. And often, if I'm doing, you know, team talks and things, and I want to just refresh myself on the sort of theoretical components of a subject, so I'll go and do that. But if I'm honest, I think peer learning is probably the best. And I talk a lot around my peers across PT Group. You know, my colleagues who work in our global services division, who are dealing with kind of FTSE level 100 companies, have very different challenges and very different customer experiences. Loads I can learn from them. I talk lots, actually, very closely to our enterprise and SME markets, make sure that we're managing, you know, and taking learning from those. But I think looking broader, you know, looking outside. I'm very fortunate. My wife works as a consultant in sort of PR and communications that deals with change. So actually just talking to her and understanding, you know, the challenges they face in different industries and different environments. I think all of that means that you're constantly challenging your own views and constantly saying, how do we be better? How do I look outside? How do I you know, look where there's opportunities to learn? And you know what, our competitors, I think they're the number one people who drive and spur us on. And I only ever have to look over the fence at Sky and know that they are a truly great organization that does some brilliant stuff. How do we get better than them? Well, that inspires me and gets me up every day. So
no, that's great. Thank you. And then just finally, maybe you can tell us what success looks like in 12 months' time. What would you like to have achieved, or just for you personally, besides beating Sky? What gets you out of bed? And
two weeks' time, I think we see success because the pubs are open again, aren't they? So
yeah, 4th of July to get sounds on.
No, I think twofold. I think, look, clearly we want the business to be hugely successful. We've got some very exciting stuff that is on our roadmap that I can't talk around, but we want to make sure that really lands, that we drive it. We've been very open as a group actually around how we roll fibre out. So this is fibre to the premise across the country. That's going to be a huge enabler, as is 5G, to open the door to a huge amount of other technology. So I think not only have we got a duty as a company, you know, to make the money for our shareholders or the rest of it, then we've got a duty to the country to make sure that we've got the best communications networks out there so that other businesses like the digital economy can thrive. So we're really excited to kind of be at the center of that. I think that's a key success. Then I think, you know, it goes back to our people. I think having a team that is truly satisfied, working on really exciting stuff, and we're developing the talent, you know, of the future, and developing people in my team to take over my role. I think that gives me huge pleasure, and I think that's a key success one as well. So I can hopefully retire to the Bahamas or something, live off my wife, and hopefully enjoy life from there on in. So there's success in 12 months.
It's the dream, the Bahamas and the pub. Okay. Well, brilliant, Chris. It's no small feat to share an hour of your time today to speak so frankly and so openly about the lessons learned, but it's been incredibly valuable. I know that even now I can take some of those ideas back to what I'm looking at immediately, and I'm sure the audience on the call today as well will have benefited from it. So thanks very much, and best of luck with whatever happens over the next 12 months.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Helen.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.